Good evening, and welcome back to Wisdom by the Fireside. Tonight, as the fire glows softly and the world quiets, we turn to a story that feels like it was written by something greater than chance. In today's Figure's story, we don't just follow a public figure, we follow a young man whose collapse stopped the nation and whose recovery reignited its soul. This isn't just about football, it's about prayer, purpose, and what God can do in the blink of a heartbeat. Let me ask you something. What would happen if you died and the whole country watched it happen live? What if millions prayed you back into life and it worked? Tonight, we tell the story of Damar Hamlin. Not the athlete, but the man who died once, lived twice, and returned with a mission bigger than the game. Damar Romiel Hamlin was born on March 24, 1998, in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. A small town just outside Pittsburgh, scarred by factory shutdowns and the slow fading of the American steel dream. From the outside, it didn't look like a place where miracles happened. Inside their tiny brick home on Hamilton Avenue, Damar lived with his mother, Nina, and his father, Mario. Money was tight. His parents were barely out of their teens when Damar was born. There were days when meals were stretched, nights when arguments echoed through the hallway. But through it all, Nina never let go of her son. "God gave me this child," she once said, "and I promised him I'd raise him strong." By the time Damar was 6, his father had started a small cleaning business, while his mum ran a daycare out of their living room. They worked around the clock, scrubbing floors and rocking babies. Damar watched them hustle, and from those long days and loud prayers before bed, something rooted in him early: discipline, faith, and loyalty. But McKees Rocks was no fairy tale. Crime was everywhere. Several of his childhood friends would be in jail, or worse, by the time he reached high school. The streets whispered one future, football offered another. At age 12, he started playing seriously. Coaches noticed he had something, not just speed or power, but vision. He could read people. He could anticipate. By the time he was a senior at Central Catholic High School, he was one of the top defensive players in the state. He could have gone anywhere, Notre Dame, Ohio State, but he chose to stay close to home. He picked the University of Pittsburgh so his little brother could see him play, so his mom didn't have to cry at airports. That says a lot about who Damar was, even before the cameras. In college, he grew into a team leader, battled injuries, sat out seasons. He learned what it meant to wait, to suffer, to heal, and still believe. His senior year, he led the team in tackles. It earned him an invite to the 2021 NFL Draft. He waited for the call in his grandmother's kitchen. He wasn't picked in the first round, or the second, or even the fourth. But then, the phone rang. "Buffalo Bills," the voice said. "We want you. 6th round, pick number 212. Not glamorous, not headline news. But for Damar, it was enough. He packed 2 bags, kissed his mum goodbye, and whispered a silent prayer on the plane ride north. "Lord, if I'm meant to be here, show me." What he didn't know was that just 2 years later, the whole country would be praying for him. Because on January 2nd, 2023, in front of millions of viewers, in a stadium packed with cheers and cameras, Damar Hamlin would drop dead on live television. It was supposed to be just another game. Monday Night Football, January 2nd, 2023. Cincinnati Bengals versus Buffalo Bills. The Bengals stadium roared with 65,000 voices. Millions more watched from couches and bars, flipping channels after New Year's, settling in for what promised to be one of the season's best matchups. Damar Hamlin had worked his way into the starting lineup after an injury sidelined Micah Hyde. At 24 years old, he had finally earned his moment under the lights, not as a substitute, not in the background. This was his time. The game started fast. Then came the first quarter. With 5:58 on the clock, Bengals receiver T. Higgins caught a pass and ran full speed. Damar stepped in, delivering a clean tackle, textbook form. He wrapped his arms around Higgins, brought him down, then stood up. But just 2 seconds later, he collapsed. No stumble, no hesitation. Just dropped flat on his back like a puppet whose strings had been cut. At first, no one moved. The crowd thought it was a normal play injury. Players take a hit, fall, get up, or stay down a bit. That's football. But then the camera cut back, and Damar wasn't breathing. The trainers ran. The players backed away. He had no pulse. Within moments, CPR began on the field. Paramedics rushed with a defibrillator. For over 9 minutes, medical professionals fought to bring him back. 9 minutes in front of the entire nation. Grown men, players, coaches dropped to their knees. Some clasped their hands in prayer. Others turned away, unable to watch. Bills quarterback Josh Allen, a stoic leader, openly wept. Bengals players formed a circle. Some held each other, some whispered. All waited. The game stopped. The world held its breath, and something unexplainable began to stir. Twitter, Instagram, ESPN, Fox, all flooded with one word: pray. Not send thoughts, not hope he's okay. Number Americans, across teams, beliefs, politics, prayed. That night, ESPN sportscaster Dan Orlovsky bowed his head on live television and prayed, trembling, "God, we believe in you. We believe you're a healer. We're asking that right now." It wasn't scheduled, it wasn't polished, but it was real. The world saw a moment where faith didn't just whisper, it cried out. They loaded Damar into the ambulance and drove away. Still no pulse. Still no certainty. Back home in McKees Rocks, his mother Nina watched it all live. And the only thing she could whisper in that moment was, "God, not my baby. Please, not my baby." Doctors at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center worked through the night. Sedated, intubated, Damar clung to life. And outside the hospital, people gathered. Fans who had never met him. Children holding candles. Grown men holding signs that said "Love for 3, the number on Damar's jersey. They prayed in circles. They knelt on concrete. They cried. And what started in Cincinnati spread to cities, churches, and hearts across America. Because in a divided nation, something about this moment felt sacred. It wasn't about politics or race or even football. It was about a young man who gave everything to a dream and nearly lost his life chasing it. And for the first time in a long time, America stopped scrolling, looked up, and turned to God together. But what no one knew, what no one expected, was what Damar Hamlin would say when he finally woke up. Because 2 days later, in a hospital room filled with machines and silent prayers, he opened his eyes. He couldn't speak. His throat was still raw from the breathing tube. So he wrote on a clipboard. And the first thing he asked, "Did we win?" Those 3 words rippled across the hospital like a sunrise through storm clouds. The doctors smiled. Nurses wiped tears. One of them leaned over and said gently, "Yes, Damar, you won. The game of life." In that moment, something changed. Because the story wasn't just about tragedy anymore. It was about resurrection. He had flatlined. His heart had stopped. But Damar Hamlin was alive, and his mind, his memory, his soul were intact. Word spread fast across the world. People who had never heard of Damar just days ago now followed his every breath like he was family. The nation that had prayed for a miracle had just witnessed one. And it wasn't wrapped in spectacle. It was humble, quiet, and deeply divine. Meanwhile, his team back in Buffalo was no longer just playing for the playoffs. They were playing for Damar. And just 6 days after his collapse, on January 8th, the Bills stepped onto the field to face the New England Patriots. The air was electric, the crowd was emotional. Fans wore red and blue shirts emblazoned with the number 3. Entire families prayed before kickoff. Then, on the opening play of the game, something surreal happened. Bills returner Nyheim Hines caught the ball at the goal line. He ran, past 1, past 2, past 5 defenders, 105 yards, touchdown. The stadium erupted. Commentators choked on their words. Josh Allen said, after the game, "It was spiritual. It was something bigger than us." Damar was watching from his hospital bed. He cried. "God is using me," he later said. "I died on national TV, so people could remember what matters." In the weeks that followed, Damar's recovery stunned doctors. His heart function returned. His cognitive abilities stayed sharp. Slowly, he walked again, smiled again, and then he started to speak again. In one of his first public appearances, his voice raspy, his eyes glassy, he whispered, "I can't thank you all enough for the prayers. God really answered them. I'm proof of it." But Damar knew this miracle wasn't just about him. Back in 2020, before the world knew his name, he'd quietly started a GoFundMe to raise $2,500 for a children's toy drive in his hometown. He wanted to give back, even when he had almost nothing. That page, forgotten by most, including Damar, suddenly resurfaced after his collapse. And within days, it raised over $9 million. Strangers, kids, celebrities, janitors, truck drivers, all donated. Not because he was a superstar, not because he had a flashy smile, but because in that terrifying moment on the field, people saw someone pure, someone real, someone who, despite his fame, still called his mom every day and still prayed before every game. The money went to children's hospitals, literacy programs, scholarships, CPR training. He called it the Chasing M's Foundation, a nod to chasing millions, not of dollars, but of moments, memories, and meaning. But even as the world praised him, Damar remained quiet. He said something once that stuck with many. "I don't think God saved me just for me. He saved me for all of us." But as he recovered, a new question hung heavy in the air. Would Damar ever return to football? Could the young man, who dropped lifeless under stadium lights, step back onto the very field that nearly took his life? The world waited. The doctors debated. And Damar prayed. Because while his heart had restarted, it was faith that had to carry him the rest of the way. In the weeks after the collapse, Damar Hamlin became more than just a football player. He was now a symbol. News anchors spoke his name with reverence. Athletes pointed to the sky after touchdowns. Children wore number 3 jerseys in classrooms across the country. Pastors referenced his story from pulpits. His collapse and resurrection had awakened something dormant in the American heart. But even as crowds chanted his name and banners read "Hamlin Strong," Damar faced a decision that would shake him more than any tackle ever had. Should he go back? Should he play again? Should he return to the field that gave him everything and nearly took it all away? Behind closed doors, doctors warned him. There's risk. Some said it was too soon. Others said it would be unwise, even reckless. But Damar didn't rush. He took quiet time. He sat with his mother, with his pastor, with his team chaplain, with himself, and with God. Because when you've been through what he'd been through, your heart stopped, the nation cried, and heaven brushed your shoulder, you start to ask different questions, like, is my life still about the game? Or has the game led me to something bigger? Weeks turned to months. Then came April 2023. At a press conference, standing tall in a crisp navy suit, Damar stepped up to the microphone. His hands trembled slightly. The room was silent. And then he said it. This event was life-changing, but I'm not afraid to say it. I want to come back. He paused. My heart is still in it, literally. I'm blessed to be here, and I believe, truly believe, that God brought me back for a purpose, to inspire, to serve, and yes, to play. The room erupted, but behind the applause was something even more powerful. Respect. Not because he was fearless, but because he had faced the worst kind of fear and come out faithful. Over the summer, he trained. He studied tape, lifted weights, spent time with kids through his foundation. But most of all, he learned how to live again, without fear. At training camp, his teammates welcomed him like a brother returning from war. Coaches watched with cautious hope. Fans held their breath. And then in August 2023, it happened. In a preseason game against the Indianapolis Colts, Damar Hamlin returned to the field. Helmet on, pads tight, that number 3 glowing bright. As he stepped onto the turf, a hush fell over the stadium. Not fear, not doubt. It was reverence. He lined up. The ball snapped. And on just the second defensive play, he made a tackle. The crowd exploded. Tears streamed down faces, players, fans, even broadcasters. This wasn't just a football move. It was a spiritual moment. Proof that God doesn't just restore breath, He restores purpose. Later, when asked what it felt like, Damar said quietly, "It was like walking through the fire and coming out cleaner." He wasn't the same man who collapsed in January. He was reborn, and with every step, he walked not just for himself, but for every soul who needed proof that miracles still happen. But while the world focused on his return, few knew the inner battle Damar still faced every night when the lights went down and the crowd faded. Because as his star rose publicly, privately, he carried a heavy question. Why me? That question haunted Damar more than any injury, any tackle, any statistic. He'd survived something that most don't. And as the world called him blessed and chosen, he couldn't help but feel the weight of survival. Because while he lived, thousands didn't. Athletes had died before, young men, fathers, sons, names that never trended, faces that never made headlines. He thought about them at night, when the applause faded and the hotel room went quiet. He thought about how easily his name could have been on a jersey patch, not a roster. Why did he get a second chance? He didn't want the answer to be just luck. He didn't believe in random. There had to be a reason. So Damar started showing up, off the field. He visited inner-city schools, sat with grieving mothers who had lost sons to heart failure. He worked with heart health nonprofits, advocating for CPR training in every school. He pushed for defibrillators to be placed in every sports arena, high school gym, and neighborhood center. He wasn't just a face anymore. He was a mission. In one classroom visit, a 10-year-old boy with asthma raised his hand and asked him, "Were you scared when you died?" The room went still. Damar knelt beside him and whispered, "No, I wasn't scared, but everyone else was. That's why we talk about it now. So next time, someone like you can get help faster." That day, the boy's mother came up to him with tears in her eyes. She said, "You didn't just come back for yourself. You came back for us." And slowly, the why me began to shift into now what? On May 1st, 2023, Damar visited Capitol Hill, not as a celebrity, but as an advocate. Wearing a navy suit and a small silver cross on his lapel, he addressed Congress, urging lawmakers to pass the Access to AEDs Act, a bill to ensure schools are equipped with life-saving defibrillators. He spoke with poise, with conviction, with gratitude. He said, "Sudden cardiac arrest happens to over 7,000 kids every year. The difference between life and death is access. I'm standing here because someone had the training. Someone had the equipment. Every kid deserves the same chance I had." He didn't mention God in that hearing, but those watching could feel him, because Damar's voice wasn't shaking. It was clear. Purpose does that to a man. Later that year, he received the George Halas Award, given to the NFL player who overcomes the most adversity. He stood on stage in a crisp black tuxedo, clutching the trophy, looking out at a crowd of athletes and legends. And with a shaky breath, he said, "This isn't my story. It's God's story. I'm just here to tell it." But as his profile rose, so did the pressure. Not everyone believed in miracles. Some critics claimed his return was media-driven. Others questioned whether faith had anything to do with it at all. A few even accused him of exploiting the moment for fame. That stung, because Damar hadn't asked for this. He didn't want to be famous for nearly dying. He just wanted to live honestly, to honor the gift he'd been given. And in quiet moments, he wondered, was he doing enough? Because what's the point of a second chance if it doesn't change how you live? That's when Damar made a decision that would surprise even his closest friends. He would leave something behind. Not football, but fear. Fear had been a silent companion since that night in Cincinnati. It wasn't loud, it didn't scream or haunt his dreams, but it lingered. It sat in the corner of the weight room. It hovered during sprints. It whispered before every snap. What if it happens again? What if the next hit is the last? What if all of this, the press, the recovery, the public hope, was just borrowed time? But Damar Hamlin had learned something in those still hospital nights, lying between beeping monitors and the soft hum of machines. Fear doesn't keep you safe. Faith does. So, in the fall of 2023, he made a quiet vow to himself. I will play. I will speak. I will serve. But I will not live one more day afraid. And so, he started doing something unexpected. Before every game, instead of hiding away in the locker room during national anthem warm-ups or pumping himself up with loud music, Damar would take a knee. Not for protest, not for the cameras, but to pray. Not just for himself, but for the man across the line of scrimmage, for his teammates, for the trainers, for anyone watching who might need a reason to hope. In some stadiums, fans noticed. In others, cameras caught the moment. Brief, silent, powerful. It became his ritual. His reminder that even if the world moved fast and the lights blazed bright, he was still just a man asking for mercy, for strength, for peace. And peace, it turned out, was contagious. In early 2024, something beautiful happened. The NFL announced that Damar Hamlin would receive the NFLPA Alan Page Community Award. the league's highest honor for community impact. He walked on stage to accept it, wearing a deep gray suit, his hands steady. No nerves, no shaking voice this time. He stood before a crowd of his peers, some of the toughest, fastest men on Earth, and said, "This award isn't about what I survived. It's about what I've chosen to do since. It's about remembering that pain can be a platform, that faith can be louder than fear, and that God can take something broken and build something beautiful." The room rose to its feet, not for a touchdown, not for a tackle, but for testimony. Back home in McKee's Rocks, Nina watched from her old couch, the same one where she once held her baby boy through asthma attacks and cold nights. She wept, not because her son had made it, but because he had become something more than what the world ever expected. 1 week later, Damar walked into a tiny community center outside Buffalo. No cameras, no interviews, just a quiet visit with a 14-year-old boy who'd recently collapsed during a basketball game and had been revived by CPR. The boy's name was Elijah. His first question: "Are you scared it'll happen again?" Damar smiled and said, "No, because what's meant for you can't miss you, and what nearly ends you might be the thing that saves someone else." In that moment, Elijah didn't just see a football player. He saw a messenger, and Damar saw his answer to a question that had once kept him awake at night. Why me? Because sometimes God doesn't choose the loudest voice or the strongest arm. Sometimes He chooses the man willing to kneel in the quiet. By the spring of 2024, Damar Hamlin wasn't just a comeback story anymore. He was a movement. Church groups spoke of him. CPR enrollment surged across the country. Pediatric heart screenings became a headline issue. Even high school coaches started carrying portable AEDs on the sidelines, not because of regulation, but because his story made them care. Still, the one thing Damar hadn't done was speak publicly about what he saw in those 9 minutes between his fall and his return. People asked, reporters danced around it, fans speculated. Did he see a light? Did he hear a voice? Did he meet God? Damar never answered. Until one night, off camera, in a quiet interview with a faith-based podcast, he did. The host asked gently, "Do you remember anything from that moment?" Damar hesitated, took a breath, then said, "Not everything, but I remembered a feeling. I remember peace. Not cold, not fear, just stillness. Like everything I'd ever worried about faded. I didn't see a tunnel or light, but I remember knowing that I wasn't alone. I knew I was held." The host stayed quiet. Damar continued, "And when I woke up, I felt like someone whispered, 'You're not done yet.'" That was the first time he'd shared it. Not for a headline, not for applause, but because he knew someone listening needed to hear it. That even when life ends, it doesn't end. In the months that followed, he leaned deeper into that quiet voice. He began speaking at youth retreats. He joined hospital prayer circles. He returned to churches where he once sat in the back row and now stood at the pulpit, not as a preacher, but as proof. Proof that resurrection doesn't always look like Easter morning. Sometimes it wears a jersey. Sometimes it collapses on a field. Sometimes it's stitched together with prayer, rehab, and faith deeper than fear. Then in November 2024, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. It was from a man in Texas, anonymous. Inside was a photo. It was of the man's teenage son, who had died a year earlier from sudden cardiac arrest during track practice. The man wrote, "I was angry at God for a long time, until your story. When I saw you collapse, I froze. But when you woke up, I cried for the first time in months. It didn't bring my son back, but it brought me back to God. I just wanted to say thank you." Damar held the letter for hours. Didn't speak, didn't post it, just folded it and placed it in his Bible. Because he finally understood. Maybe this was never just about football. Maybe it was never about stats or awards. Maybe God allowed the world to witness his death, so the world could rediscover life. And though Damar still played the game he loved, something in him shifted. He wasn't chasing victory. He was chasing meaning. Every play, every hit, every breath was worship. Not performance, but just when things felt stable again, Damar would soon face a twist no one saw coming, one that had nothing to do with his heart, but everything to do with his name. It began quietly, like most things that stir controversy, just a few murmurs online, a Reddit thread, then a conspiracy video on YouTube. Then it spread. Some people began claiming that the Damar Hamlin now seen on TV wasn't the real Damar, that he had died that night on the field, and the NFL had replaced him with a look-alike. They pointed to still photos where his face was masked or hidden. They speculated about Illuminati ties, NFL cover-ups, even government agendas. None of it had a shred of evidence, but it went viral. Damar clone started trending. Talk show hosts joked. Pundits rolled their eyes. But Damar, he stayed silent. Until one Sunday after practice, he was asked about it by a local Buffalo reporter. Damar laughed gently, then grew quiet, and he said, "People are going to believe what they want. I know who I am. My family knows. God knows. That's enough for me." But what he didn't say was how much it hurt, how surreal it was to survive death, only for strangers to say he didn't exist. It rattled him, not because he feared the rumor, but because it reminded him of something deeper. How fast the world forgets what's real. How quickly faith is replaced by fantasy, and prayer by paranoia. That night, he called his mother, Nina. She answered on the second ring. "Ma, people really think I'm not me," he said, half laughing. She didn't miss a beat. "Baby, they thought Jesus didn't rise either." That line stayed with him, not because he was comparing himself to Christ, but because he realized something. Truth doesn't need everyone to believe it. It only needs you to live it. So he pressed on, appeared at CPR training events, showed up at churches unannounced just to sit in the back and worship, visited hospitals where kids waited with trembling hearts just to meet him, not the athlete, but the survivor and the man of faith. In one of his quietest moments, at a youth prison outreach, Damar was asked by a teenager behind bars, "How do you know God's real?" Damar didn't quote scripture. He didn't preach. He looked the boy in the eye and said, "Because I heard my mom's voice when I had no heartbeat. I felt her prayers like they were hands pulling me back, and I woke up with peace in my chest. That ain't science. That's God." That night, one of the guards told Damar that 4 boys had asked to see the prison chaplain, all because of that answer. And just like that, he understood his assignment again. He wasn't here to convince everyone. He was here to be evidence. Still, fame continued pulling at him. TV deals, endorsement offers, reality show pitches. He turned most of them down. One agent told him, "You could be a brand. You could cash in." Damar replied, "I'm not a brand. I'm a bridge." To what? To belief, to healing, to God, if only for a few. And while many forgot how it all started, that cold January night on live TV, Damar never did. Because once you've been brought back by grace, you never walk the same again. But there was still one more moment that would seal his legacy. One more twist that would come, not on a field, but in a hospital room across the country. It was early 2025. Damar was in Phoenix for a heart health summit. He'd spoken on a panel, shared his story, posed for photos, then quietly slipped away from the spotlight. The truth was, public life still exhausted him. He was grateful, but always walking that line between being present and being consumed. On his way out of the hotel, his phone buzzed. A text from someone he hadn't heard from in years. "Please come. It's urgent. Children's Mercy Hospital, Kansas City." It was from Dr. Reena Patel, the cardiologist who had first treated him when he was a teen with arrhythmia concerns no one else took seriously. She'd always believed he was special, long before the NFL. Without hesitation, Damar booked a flight and arrived the next morning. The hospital room was quiet. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, lay in a bed surrounded by wires and machines. Her skin was pale. Her eyes were closed. Her name was Zara. She'd suffered a rare cardiac arrest during recess at school. It took 6 minutes for someone to find an AED. Her brain had gone too long without oxygen. She hadn't woken up in 5 days. Her mother sat beside the bed, exhausted, broken. When Damar walked in, she didn't recognize him at first. Then she gasped. Tears rushed in. "You're him?" He nodded gently, but he didn't talk about his fame, or his foundation, or his survival. He sat quietly beside Zara, took her small hand in his, closed his eyes, and prayed. God, I've been here before. You know that. You brought me back when no one thought you would. I'm not here to ask for more, but if there's any chance, any mercy, please, let her wake up, just so her mama can hear her laugh again. He stayed there for over an hour. Then he kissed Zara's hand, whispered a blessing, and left. No press, no social media, just faith. 3 days later, his phone buzzed again. It was a video message. Zara, smiling weakly, propped up by pillows. Her voice was soft but steady. Hi, Mr. Damar. I woke up. Mummy says you prayed for me. Thank you. I like unicorns and blue popsicles. Come visit again. He stared at the screen for a long time and cried, not because he thought he caused it, but because he knew, deep in his bones, that prayer still moves mountains. Sometimes it's CPR. Sometimes it's a doctor's hands. Sometimes it's God working through us, quietly, when we show up. Later that year, at another awards ceremony, a reporter asked Damar what he hoped people would remember him for. He didn't flinch. Not for a game, not for going viral. I just hope they remember I never wasted the second chance I was given. And that's the legacy he built. Not a legacy of stats, Super Bowl rings, or shoe deals, but of stillness in chaos, of prayer in pressure, of a man who died on the field and chose to live on his knees. Years from now, few will remember the final score of that Monday night game in January 2023, but they will remember the moment the world stopped. They'll remember the silence after the collapse. The millions who prayed aloud, some for the first time in years. The ESPN anchor who bowed his head on live television. The teammates who dropped to their knees with tears in their eyes. The stadium lights dimmed by something unseen, yet holy. And most of all, they will remember that Damar Hamlin stood up again, not just physically, spiritually, emotionally, eternally. In church halls and hospital waiting rooms, his name still stirs something. Not fame, but faith. Not celebrity, but certainty. That sometimes, in a broken and divided world, God still shows up. And sometimes he doesn't speak through thunder or miracles carved in stone. Sometimes he whispers through one heartbeat, returning when it shouldn't have. Damar's story isn't about survival. It's about surrender to purpose, to faith, to a mission far beyond football. Because some men are called to score touchdowns, and some are called to wake up, so others remember to believe. So tonight, as we close this chapter, remember this. When the heart stops, the soul doesn't. When the lights go out, God's hand remains. And when the world gathers in silence and says a single word together, pray, something shifts. Damar Hamlin didn't just come back for himself. He came back for all of us, to remind us that breath is a blessing, that second chances are sacred, and that one quiet life, lived with courage and faith, can reignite a nation's soul. Thank you for spending this evening with us by the fire. We hope this story stirred something in your heart, something that lingers long after the flames go dim. Because what you've just heard isn't just a story, it's a reminder that miracles still walk among us, that faith still revives what was lost, and that you, yes you, are never alone in your battles. You are seen, you are loved, and you are not done yet. So stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep listening. We'll be right here. Thank you for being part of our little fireside circle tonight. If the story touched your heart, share it to the ones you love. And if you would like to listen to more like it, you know where to find us.